When I was in university, I became obsessed with studying and doing homework in the most efficient, effective, and efficacious way possible to get better grades. And you might think that trying to become more efficient and effective would improve my grades. And you're absolutely correct for thinking that my grades increased significantly, but the means of getting there were counterproductive to learning. And as a result, I learned less and retained less knowledge while simultaneously getting my grades up. And the reason for that is because the most earnest reason for studying is to learn, not to get the highest grade possible. So in this video, I will point out why trying to become more productive might destroy the learning process of a student. And just so you know, the grades are not in correlation with the amount of knowledge I accumulated. Let me explain what productivity is. The term productivity differs from context to context. Industrial, organizational, or national productivity refers to the efficiency of the production of goods or services expressed by some measure. Measurement of productivity are often expressed as a ratio of an aggregate output to a single input or an aggregate input used in a production process, i.e., output per unit of input, typically over a specific period of time. And in this video, I will be focusing not on the aforementioned productivity, but on the personal productivity, in which industrial productivity, for example, it's easier to measure the productivity because there are clear parameters to measure. And on the other hand, the measurement of a personal productivity has more vague parameters, and how it should be measured is still highly debated to this day. Some say it's the X amount of tasks finished within Y amount of time, and in the case of students, it's how many assignments finished for a certain period of time, or how many chapters studied within a week. Some say it's the amount of time spent focusing and being quote-unquote productive, regardless of the amount of output produced. And for me, the way I measured my own personal productivity was, or rather how I see myself as being more productive than I was completing as many tasks as possible in the shortest possible of time, or learning as many as chapters or topics as possible in the shortest possible time. And I want to show you why having this idea of what productivity is ruined my learning process. Learning, by which I mean absorbing knowledge, retaining it, taking the time to pontificate and reflect on what you've learned, is difficult to measure in the truest sense, because the knowledge you gain is stored in your mind in a metaphysical way rather than as something materially observable, unlike homework or assignment, which produce visible outputs. Learning itself has little quantifiable outcome. While you cannot truly measure what you have learned in a metaphysical sense, you can get an estimation of your understanding by writing from memory or using tools like flashcard to test your knowledge or do a practice exams or whatever. So following a quote-unquote completing as many tasks as possible in the shortest possible time approach often pushes the student to rush and cram as much as they can, but learning isn't something you can hurry. Studying becomes unenjoyable when you're speeding through the pages of the textbooks, because anxiety and pressures lead to rush reading and poor comprehension, and those don't go well together. For me, reading started to feel painful because I was constantly worried that all of the time and effort would be pointless, that I might not pass the class anyway. And over time, I began to resent studying because each session triggered anxiety and almost like kind of Pavlovian conditioning, where textbook became associated with stress and fear, and it eventually made me dislike reading and studying altogether, since it reminded me of the pressure of studying for final exam. And well, I actually lied about the reading textbook part. I didn't read textbook at all because I deemed them to be inefficient way of learning. So instead of reading textbooks, I just read the material online and I watch lectures on YouTube and do practice question and memorizing using flashcard. If a material would take me X amount of hours to learn, I would think that it wasn't worth doing or studying because I could use that time to do something more productive, like homework that is due tomorrow. And there was always, quote unquote, something more productive to do in my mind, and that resulted in me not doing anything due to the analysis paralysis, trying to decide what the most productive thing to do at that moment was and what would be the most cost-effective way of studying. And let's say a final exam is composed of 10 questions from multiple chapters in a book. The professor provide an exam blueprint showing that one questions weighs 80% of the total score and covers only one chapter, while the remaining 20% is spread across other 9 questions from different chapters. And to get the highest grade possible, again, this is hypothetically, like in an ideal test situation, it shouldn't be this way, but to get the highest grade possible, one would focus primarily on that one chapter and give less attention to the rest. And as a result, one would not study most of the book, because at the end of the day, what matters most is the highest grade, and the highest grade only covers one chapter, and this leads to less knowledge accumulated due to the pressure of getting good grades. But the main problem is, because this is a hypothetical situation, but in this hypothetical situation, the main problem is that the professor gave unbalanced distribution score or weight. But ideally it shouldn't be this way. Studying a chapter that may or may not appear on the exam feels like a waste of time, and it makes studying uncomfortable due to the uncertainty of whether that knowledge will be useful on the test. Having those doubts is not really, it doesn't feel good at all, because you feel that sometimes you feel like you're wasting your time by learning. That doesn't make sense. How can you waste time by learning, But yeah, it happens. And learning from textbooks in order to do homework takes more time than doing the homework using AI or looking up the answers online or copying your friend's homework. When I was in university, like a good portion of it, like there was no publicly available LLM. So before LLM, people used to cheat either by copying their classmates or by looking the answer online. And doing homework organically requires understanding the material, which involves reading textbooks, absorbing, reflecting on the idea on the textbooks, and finally applying them to the assignments. And looking at it from a quote-unquote productive standpoint, all of that seems less productive compared to just using AI or to cheat or to copy or look the answers online or whatever. And remember, the so-called productivity demands you to finish as many tasks as possible in the shortest time possible. And so for someone with that productivity mindset, which is wrong, it's hard to see that the main objective is for you to learn, not to finish as much tasks as possible in the shortest possible time or to get the highest grade as possible using any means necessary. And even if one realized that cheating prevent real learning, they might still be tempted to cheat due to the competition. And if others are using AI and you're not, you might feel like you're moving at a much slower pace and left behind. And the feeling of being left behind is extremely uncomfortable. Well, at least for me. And also seeing some of your classmates get higher grades or on a test or on assignments or homework, well, they didn't even study it for the test, and the only reason why they got better grades than you is because they cheated, is one of the worst feeling you can feel. And looking at it from the quote-unquote productivity mindset, and the most productive approach to getting higher grades is to cheat, because it takes lesser time, lesser effort, and possibly maybe higher grades too. So it's more in the traditional productivity sense, it's more productive. And there are many factors that can cause a student to shift from student mindset, to this so-called productivity mindset. A student might see learning as less important than completing homework because studying does not produce a tangible output. The knowledge in your mind is a metaphysical construct, whereas homework produces visible results such as written work, such as an essays, for example. It's impossible to measure, in the truest sense of measurement, the amount of knowledge you have accumulated during that studying sessions. When a student adopts this productivity mindset, everything begins to measured by an imagined hourly rate influenced by productivity gurus figures such as Timothy Ferriss, who wrote in his 4-Hour Workweek book that you should calculate your effective hourly rate and ruthlessly cut low-value tasks. And speaking of which, I'm gonna do a video on that book. When you start measuring everything in this way, almost everything, well, not almost everything, many things that you normally see as worth doing feels not worth doing anymore, and as a result of that, you stop doing things you actually want or need to do, and instead you chase these quote-unquote productive activities defined by the efficiency. And so this approach is incompatible with how a student should study. Take the example of washing dishes. If you're self-employed or an entrepreneur, washing dishes can feel like a waste of time. Even while doing it, you feel rushed and frustrated as if you're not being productive enough, and it becomes exhausting to constantly prioritize productivity over presence. Now imagine washing dishes, but in the academical settings. You can be studying intensely and deeply for a long time, but there is this little voice in your head that is saying you should only study the things that matter, and you might learn too much by reading too deeply on a certain topics like derivative or eigenvector value matrix that might not even be on the exam. And at the same time, the alternative of doing all of these is just to keep studying altogether and just to cheat and skip the uncomfortable feeling of studying topics that you're not even certain that they will be on the exams. It's no wonder why cheating is rampant, and when you cheat, you're doing yourself a disservice because you have paid for the education and now you're wasting all of that money just for you to learn nothing. And instead of learning, you just pretend to know what you don't know. So if you're a student and you've been having this similar productivity like I used to, perhaps you should stop viewing studying as a way to get better grades, but to know more and learn more valuable knowledge so that you can implement it in the future or present. I would suggest you to not follow the productivity advice from a non-student, because many productivity advice out there are not suitable for a student that want to gain and retain as much knowledge as possible. So don't worry about learning the most efficient way possible, because that doesn't exist. And last but not least, if I were to recommend a book on productivity that is applicable for students, it's Deep Work by Calvin Newport. Thank you for watching. You can support me by liking the video. Please comment down below, agree or disagree, subscribe to my channel, and I see you on the next episode. Peace. I'm out. Bye.